Mr. Chairman and ICDE delegates, I greet you from Australia, land of sunshine, kangaroos and koala bears, land of the free which was pioneered by convicts from England. And the medium of video allows you to skip through the boring bits, switch me off altogether, or maybe even replay the best bits. The video will summarise my paper, which you will by now have read and committed to memory, and then it will identify the implications of the approaches which I advocate. When I read through my paper in order to prepare for this presentation, I wondered how I'd used up so many pages to make a few fairly basic points. Anyway, this is what I put forward. Distance education was once a significant educational development which provided access to education for disadvantaged groups. But now, it is a concept which is only useful as a means to maintain empires, esoteric philosophical discussions, and academic reputations. This is because social, economic, political, technological, and educational developments have all led to new and different expectations of educators. They face increasing pressure to concentrate on needs of students and not on their own needs and those of their institutions. This in turn means that they are expected to design and use educational strategies and learning resources which are appropriate to the task of meeting student needs, regardless of how those strategies and resources may have been categorised in the past. Indeed, the pressure is to use and mix strategies, resources and student support systems which can be drawn from the traditions of distance education or campus-based education, or for that matter from other traditions such as work-based training, or from new approaches which have now been made possible by the potential of the new technologies. My paper advocates that all educationalists take a client-oriented approach. I should explain that I am using the word client to include individual students, specific cohorts of students, and corporate clients, such as employers, government, community groups, and other educational institutions. In order to take this approach, it is necessary to develop imaginative and innovative responses to technological opportunities, to political, economic and social pressures, and to competition. Finally, I propose in my paper that we support, encourage and take part in practically oriented cooperative projects which share talent, expertise, facilities and resources. In order to do so, it is necessary to find wealthy sponsors, to overcome the not developed here syndrome, to resolve the aid versus trade debate, and to carry out a meaningful study on the translation of learning resources from different languages and different cultures. So that should all be fairly simple. Anyway, that's what I say in my paper. Now I would like to move on to some of its implications. Educators will need to develop the special skills which are required to liaise, consult and negotiate with individual and corporate clients, and to do so in ways which will ensure that the clients have meaningful involvement in the design of programs, strategies and resources, and in the implementation of programs for individual students or for cohorts of students. Accreditation and course approval procedures will need to recognise client-specific programs. In order to do so, it will be necessary to move from approval or accreditation of long, formal courses with prescribed number, content and sequence of units, to the approval or accreditation of modules, which can be combined in a variety of ways, or to the approval or accreditation of broad study frameworks, which allow for a range of possible internal arrangements. Whatever the approach, accreditation procedures should concern themselves with broad educational objectives and not with detailed implementation strategies. Decisions on delivery design are distinct from those on course approval, and should be determined by educators and clients who are concerned with program implementation. In the past, learning resources have been developed with an hypothetical average student in mind. This will have reflected the developer's image of a typical distance education student, or a campus-based student, or a mixed-mode student. Quite apart from the fact that a cohort of, say, distance education students may not have included any who matched this typical notion of the average, the open approach to learning which I am advocating requires learning resources which have the flexibility to be used in a variety of ways with a variety of students. One possible way of doing this is to develop texts, or their non-print equivalents, for use by all students studying particular topics. And then to develop a range of separate study guides or their non-print equivalents, which will vary according to the learning needs of different students. So the same texts would be used by students who spend little or no time on campus and whose major method of assessment is the submission of assignments, by students whose work is based on supervised projects performed at their places of employment, and by students who attend face-to-face classes in institutions. But in each case, the students will use different study guides and interact in different ways with educators and other persons who provide them with support. It is also necessary to recognise the complexities of learning resource development. In particular, it is necessary to take account of the various types of expertise that need to be brought together, the time that it will take to develop anything which is worthwhile, and the associated costs. I will refer to this again when I consider the questions of funding and of categories of expertise. Far too often, granting of credit reflects a time-serving approach to education and a belief that the only worthwhile time served is at one's own institution in one's own course of study. An open approach will grant credit for learning units if students can demonstrate that they already possess the knowledge, skills and/or attitudes which those units aim to develop. This means that we would give credit as appropriate for studies in other programs, for studies in other institutions, and for life and work experience. Evidence on which to base the granting of credit will include institutional certification, declarations from employers, and successful completion of challenge assessment tasks. Some people may not be sure exactly what is meant by challenge assessment tasks. They can be short tests or exams or practical exercises in which the students are given the opportunity to demonstrate that in fact they possess the knowledge or the skills that they claim to possess. The most enlightened approach to credit which I have come across was at New York's Empire State College, although it was interesting to note that within that institution it was the distance education department which had the strictest approach to giving credit. Opening up learning has two major implications for industrial relations. To begin with, educators' roles will change, in some cases significantly, as there is greater emphasis on learning design and learning management. It is probably true to say that the change will be more dramatic for campus-based teachers than for distance educators, who have traditionally been obliged to consider how to design and manage programs for students in a variety of situations. But even distance educators will be expected to display increased flexibility and to combine strategies in ways for which traditional distance education teaching has not prepared them. This will have significant implications for terms and conditions negotiated by the industrial organisations which represent educators. In the past, they have been content to negotiate on the basis of hours spent in front of a classroom. In the future, they will need to obtain recognition for such activities as the design of learning programs and learning resources, managing numbers of students working on individualised programs, time spent on teleconferencing, or time spent responding to student work submitted on paper, on audio and videotape, on stored telephone messages, and so on. The second impact on industrial relations will be in the area of demarcation. This is not a happy thought for countries such as Australia and England, where unions are craft-based rather than industry-based. And this approach is also reflected in their education industries, where, in industrial terms, teachers are distinguished from non-teachers, technicians from non-technicians, electricians from carpenters, and so on. However, students engaged in individualised learning programs will interact with a number of reference points other than persons occupying formally identified teaching positions. They may perform practical work under the supervision of a laboratory technician. They may seek the advice of a librarian when selecting learning resources. They may participate in factory-based projects overseen by senior factory staff. As they do so, there will often be very fine lines to draw between the support given by these people and that which is given by teachers. And there will therefore be corresponding difficulties determining their industrial status. Let me turn now to the distasteful subject of money. Funding and the financial planning on which it is based have always been problematic areas for distance educators, particularly when they have found themselves involved in financial negotiations with funding authorities who simply do not understand that resources for distance education students could not be allocated according to formulae which assumed a certain number of contact hours per student. Distance educators should be happy that moves towards more flexible learning and delivery strategies for all students will result in their campus-based colleagues also facing these frustrations as they try to convince uncaring administrators that resource allocation must allow for front-end investment costs and recurrent costs which reflect a variety of approaches, that investment is not just in building and equipment but also in planning, design and development of strategies and resources, that the cost-benefit of investments will often not be realised until some time has elapsed, that ongoing costs of programs, including special arrangements and special support services, must be acknowledged before the programs begin and then must be met over the lifetimes of those programs. A related question to funding is that of performance measures. Educational institutions are being called upon to perform better and in ways which reflect client demand. However, I have argued that this very demand leads to a much more complex provision of education based on individualised learning programs which, apart from using a variety of strategies and resources, will have a variety of starting and finishing times. The effect of this is that measurement of success becomes much more complicated than our old friends, the simple-minded administrators of institutions, systems and governments might have thought and unfortunately still do think. They still talk of enrolment numbers, student contact hours, assignment return rates and course completion rates as the appropriate measures. But how does this account for students who only wish to complete parts of courses, programs which do not require contact hours or assignment submission, students who do not wish to attend classes or submit assignments but who nonetheless successfully sit for examinations, students who do not present for exams but who are satisfied with what their studies have done for them, programs whose aim is to improve employment prospects or to improve work performance, students who drop out of vocational programs because the work they have already done has led to offers of employment, and so on and so on. You may have noticed that I have voiced some criticism of administrators and authorities, so why should I stop now? Quite apart from more enlightened attitudes to funding and performance measures, these persons will need to change their minds about such limiting, albeit comfortable and administratively convenient, concepts as an academic year which starts and ends on prescribed dates, the long formal course as the basic unit of enrolment, the categorising of students as being either distance education or campus-based. My paper proposes that it often makes educational and financial sense for educators to cooperate and to share resources. Of course, the fact that something makes sense does not always mean that it will happen, but there are now also strong market and political pressures to share and collaborate. Cooperation and sharing can take place between individuals, between and within institutions, and between and within states and nations. Very often, it will take the form of drawing on or combining particular areas of expertise which are associated with particular individuals or institutions. Indeed, the pressures and or the expectations to share resources or to enter into collaborative arrangements often lead to deliberate or gradual concentrations of expertise in particular staff positions, departments, or institutions. It is useful to consider the categories of expertise which are involved, not least of all so that we and the authorities and clients with whom we deal recognise the complexities of designing, developing, and implementing useful learning strategies and associated learning resources. They include expertise in content, which could be academic or technical, delivery, learning and instructional strategies, and media and associated technologies. These are themselves divided into a number of areas of expertise, as shown in this table. As you can see, the major areas of computing, video, audio and print all raise questions about what sort of approach should be taken to the telecommunications, the systems, the hardware, the software and the courseware which will be associated with those areas. And going a little further, it's necessary to consider questions for each of those about what is involved in designing or selecting, what is involved with development and acquisition procedures, what one has to do to install or get the thing going, what sort of effort and resources and expertise need to be put into their application, and finally, what sort of expertise is required for maintenance. And you can take it even further. There are even subsets of all those subsets. For example, you take a look at the question of learning resources, let us say in printed study materials. The question arises about the different sort of expertise that might be necessary for production compared with reproduction, if you'll pardon the expression, compared with distribution. Finally, none of the approaches I have suggested will be possible or useful without adequate staff development, both in basic training and in ongoing programs which provide in-service training, industrial release and study tours. And it is needed by all categories of persons at all levels. It should be provided to educational, administrative and technical staff, and it should be provided to managers and to operatives. I will just touch on the question of basic teacher training. In Australia, at least, this does not seem to prepare teachers who are able to develop and provide flexible strategies. I suspect that this is as a result of both the content and the methodologies of their training programs. Far be it from me to caricature teacher training as a process of theoretical and irrelevant lectures presented in teachers' colleges or faculties of education by refugees from real teaching, and supplemented by short, infrequent and highly artificial teaching sessions. However, on another occasion I would like to argue for a system of teacher training based on team teaching with experienced and innovative educators in the educational workplace. So there we have it. The pressures for and the moves towards open learning will result in change. Not only will a lot of traditional thinking go down the drain, but so too will a lot of our own comfortable and self-serving practices. If we are to cope with these challenges, we will need to come to grips with the implications for the ways in which we deal with our individual and corporate clients, develop and accredit programs, design the delivery of programs, develop learning resources, grant credit, consider industrial relations issues, negotiate for funds and prepare budgets, measure our performance, administer our institutions and systems, cooperate and share with our colleagues in other programs, institutions, states and countries, and finally train and provide ongoing staff development for teachers, managers, administrators and technicians. Or maybe we should just make a nice cup of tea and dream of the past when it was all so much easier. Thank you and good night.